Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. And before the interview starts, I just want to give a brief disclaimer that I am interviewing a Christian today. So if that is a concern for you based on your where you are with your deconstruction, deconversion, if that's a trigger for you, I certainly understand, but I want to mention that before we get started. I think though that for those of you that can stay, you'll be amazed at the insights and some of the topics that Julianne Smith brings to the table. So I do invite you to stay if you can, and but do what's best for you, for your heart, for your healing, for your triggers. And with that, we'll get into the interview. Thanks so much. Today, I'm speaking with Julianne Smith. Julianne, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I appreciate you doing this. And we had to sync up our times because you're on the other side of the country. So I'm going to give you a brief bio here, but you're in Richland, Washington, and from Gresham, Oregon. I imagine that those are some beautiful parts of the country. Is that fair to say?
Gresham, Oregon is on the green side of Oregon. So that's by Mount Hood and about an hour away from the Oregon coast. So yes, and then it's quite interestingly, where I live right now is 3.5 hours away from Gresham, but it's in Southeast Washington in the desert, very dry. So completely opposite terrain.
Wow. Do you all have snakes or anything like that?
Oh yeah. We only get 6 or 7 inches of rain a year. So it's very, the high desert. So
that's awesome.
I love it. I love all the sunshine.
Yeah. I imagine you'll get a lot of good photos being in a place like that.
Yeah.
And you studied at Columbia Basin College, which I admit I'd never heard about before, with a Bachelor of Applied Science in Cybersecurity. And just that irony, I am a certified fraud examiner myself. I've spent many years doing fraud and looking for the bad guys, especially the hackers and the people doing the pump and dump schemes and the Craigslist love schemes and so forth. But it's an interesting world. And you love to travel, garden, play the piano, and sing. And you have 7 children.
Yes.
And what ages are they currently?
Okay, so 36 this year down to 16. I guess 35 down to, I don't know, 35 down to 16.
Either way, you've got your hands full just remembering everybody's birthdays and what they're doing.
It's hard.
And in terms of your just your online presence, I just want to mention you're on Twitter at Defend the Sheep, and you blog at spiritualsoundingboard.com. And you're also well known because your pastor sued you at one point for $500,000, which I'm sure we'll touch on at some point. But apart from that, just want to mention everybody, you are a Christian. And I'd like to mention that just in terms of making sure people know who I'm speaking with. Before we go into your story, is there anything else you want to add to your bio?
That's good. That's a nice bio.
Gotcha. Well, I'd love to just hear your story. Feel free to take us to whatever parts you want to. I usually ask people to tell us about their childhood and their upbringing, especially in Christianity, but feel free to start us wherever you feel like the story is relevant for the topics we're going to touch on today.
Yeah. Okay. So again, thank you for having me. I know it took a while for us to connect. When I was born, my father was not a good dad, and my mother divorced when I was a year old. So she was a single mom for a while. When she got married, she was Catholic, and then the new guy that she married was Baptist. So pretty much my childhood was going back and forth. There was a time where I went to 3 years in elementary Baptist school. At the same time, I was going to a Catholic church, and I remember the Baptist teachers getting on my case because they found out that I was Catholic. And that's kind of interesting because that's a foretaste of, what was going to happen later on. And even then I had seen abuse, second, third, and fourth grade. And I can, go back and identify it as such. So then I spent 5th grade in a Catholic school. Then we moved to Gresham. That was in California. We moved up to Gresham, Oregon. And I went to public grade school. And at that time, it was Catholic church. And I graduated from a Catholic high school. But during my Catholic high school, I think I was sophomore, I went to the local Foursquare church. It's a, charismatic, slightly charismatic, non-denominational And I spent time with their youth group and their choir. And so I got a taste of both. And during that time, I read the Keith Green Catholic Chronicles. Are you familiar with that?
The Keith Green, the musical artist?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I know him. I don't know anything about his background, though.
So he wrote these things called Catholic Chronicles. And what he did was he tore apart the Catholic Church. And so I read those documents and I took them back to my Catholic high school. And I talked to the religious order people, like brothers. And I challenged them. I go, what is this? Why do we believe this? And so that was an interesting part of my journey.
Was it like the whole, the Pope is the mark of the beast kind of thing? He's the
Mary is,
or...
Mary doesn't sin, that kind of thing, just the different kind of beliefs that Catholics have. You pray to Mary and instead of God, and that kind of thing. So I stayed in the Catholic Church until I got married. The day I got married was in the Catholic Church with a Catholic priest and the Foursquare pastor. And then that was the last time I was in the Catholic Church. From that point on, we were in charismatic churches, and my then husband got in the military. We ventured into other charismatic Assembly of God, that kind of thing. Until we moved to Virginia Beach. That was about maybe 6 years into the military career. And we went to a non-denominational, non-charismatic church. And that's when we started getting more into not so much fundamentalism, but it was definitely more straight, and it really wasn't so legalistic. But the thing that happened was I was a homeschool mom, and that community got me into legalism. So it was, the Christian homeschool movement was very, very pivotal in my life. In any homeschool, when I wanted to find out information and have connections with other Christians, there really was only one source, and you would go to these conventions, homeschool conventions, and they were put on by Homeschool Legal Defense Association, HSLDA. And they were the proponents of patriarchy. They promoted courtship. They promoted the purity culture, full quiver. I have 7 kids. So they, they promoted a bunch of ideologies at the homeschool conventions. And I remember thinking, this is so weird. Why aren't they just talking about curricula and, how to teach your kid to read, or, how to, maybe practical things for moms. But during those workshops and conferences, they focus so much on those ideologies. And at first I kind of whatever, but then, after a while, these are the people that I'm connecting with, and I was connecting with them online as well. And these are the people you go to, hey, my language arts program's not working right, or whatever. What are you using? And you'd connect with other moms who were in the same boat. And then you would hear about these ideologies. They would just kind of slip in. And long story short, I started adapting and following suit, reading what they were writing and go, okay, yeah, sort of. And eventually you start buying it. It's so, oh gosh, it just grabs you in and hooks you, and so unfortunately I bought into a lot of that crap, and it is very, very pervasive. And that was the right way to raise your family. That was the right way to be a godly wife and a godly mom. So that was pretty huge.
Can I ask a few questions to step back a little bit?
Yeah.
Was there with the whole Catholic versus Protestant issue, did the Catholics, or did you as a Catholic, did you get the message from Protestants that you were not saved? You were going to probably go to hell?
Oh, yeah.
If you didn't? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And pretty much after I had done my research in high school, I knew that I wasn't going to remain Catholic. I stayed Catholic just to honor my parents,
Hmm.
my mom, just my mom. And then I left
Gotcha.
when
When
we
you
got married.
Was there a time later on when you kind of placed your faith in Christ, made a profession that said, where you said, I'm not Catholic, I'm Protestant, and this is why, because I believe in this versus that. Did you have a specific time when you made your profession of faith clear?
Well, no, I didn't really. I figured God figured that out too.
Yeah. Do you remember though, like was there a time where just even in the privacy of your own heart and your own, prayer life and so forth, where you remember saying, this is it, like, I understand I'm a sinner deserving punishment from God. I understand that Christ is the perfect sacrifice, and I'm claiming, that, God, I accept it. It's a free gift and I do want it. And I accept it. I want to be a child of God. Please forgive my sins. And I do believe in the death and resurrection of Christ. Was there a
Yeah.
time when you said that to yourself?
Oh yeah, I did that early on in elementary school, and then I redid it when I was about 15 when I got connected with that other church.
Okay.
But I totally, after I had done that investigation on the Catholic Church, I knew that my time was short, and so that was the last time when we got married that I had been in the Catholic Church.
Yeah. For anyone that doesn't know the term quiverful, could you explain what that's all about?
Yeah, Quiverfull is meaning that you're trusting God with your fertility. Basically, it's a free for all. And that's a really interesting thing because in the Catholic Church, they don't believe in birth control. They practice, they do allow natural family planning, and that's not rhythm method. That's not where you take the woman's cycle and you subtract a number of days. That's crazy way to do practice birth control, but they do things where you're taking your basal body temperature and you're making cervix observations and all this stuff. And it's highly effective. In fact, all of my children, except the first one, when I was on some medication that altered my cycle, all of my children were planned, even my miscarriages, and all of the space in between my children were planned. And so I felt really guilty with the full quiver movement because, frankly, I know when I'm going to have a baby or conceive a baby, and I know when to not conceive a baby. And I felt like I was in control and I wasn't relinquishing that to God. And so I felt guilty that I wasn't a good quiverful mom. But, the Duggar family, they're well known. They practice Quiverful. So basically, you're allowing God to, you're allowing conception whenever it happens. You're not doing anything to prevent pregnancy. And in fact, in some of those circles, they are actually weaning their babies early so that they will get their fertility back and have another opportunity to have a baby. And even when doctors will say, it's not good for you, you have some medical, they'll say you're just not trusting God enough. It's really harmful crap. This ideology.
Did you find there was any magic number where if you had a dozen, you were kind of in the club and you were obviously trusting God, or if you only had 4 or 5, were you kind of on the fence? And if it was clear you weren't moving towards the 6th and 7th and 8th kid, it was are you really going to do this to the beautiful blessing that God is waiting to bestow upon you?
Well, you didn't hear it, but you kind of got the gist of it. And I made it. I made it with 7.
You're in the club.
I'm in the club, but I'm kind of iffy.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question about the whole idea of having big families? Do you think that any of the people that are doing that, I mean, I know that there is this base level motivation of babies are wonderful, and they are. And I myself have 4 beautiful children, and I love them. Babies are wonderful. Families are wonderful. The love that you have as a family is wonderful. So, have a life full of love means have a life full of people that you love and that love you back. and obviously to receive it from God's perspective, of God wants to bestow on you this beautiful blessing. The blessings of the womb are from the Lord. But is there also potentially for some people a motivation, and this is going to sound crude, but to basically outbreed the pagans so that you can
Yeah,
outvote the pagans, basically?
absolutely.
Okay.
Well, absolutely. If you look at Rushdoony, he totally promoted that. He wanted women just to be bearing a lot of children, and he's a Reconstructionist. So his whole intent was for the homeschooling community to take charge here. And I wrote in a blog post, but I don't think people have given it enough credit. But really, the success of patriarchy and the homes and Reconstruction is totally dependent on daughters, completely dependent on daughters. Because once your daughter buys into it, she's saying, yay, let's go. She's the one allowing pregnancy and, getting married and following suit with that ideology. However, once she goes to college, uses critical thinking skills, that's when there might be some challenges. And, she might say, I don't think so. So daughters are the critical piece in the Reconstruction and patriarchy. Once they grasp that ideology and hold on to it dearly, they are perpetuating the cycle.
Would you say, and I'm taking us away from your story here, but we'll get right back to it shortly, but would you say that mentality, and I know it's wrapped up in different subcultures of, dominion theology and other ways that it expresses itself, but would you say that Christian subculture in general is growing from what you can tell?
I have left all of that stuff, and I don't really have a handle on if it's growing or not. I really don't know. I mean, it's still definitely there. I see it on Twitter.
Yeah. I've been really busy asking. I'm reading some stuff about a pastor named Doug Wilson. If anyone doesn't know him, I highly recommend you don't Google him. But Doug Wilson's group is out in Moscow, Idaho, and they obviously directly say, like, we want to take over Moscow, and I think they want to take over a lot more than that. But we want this to be a Christian town.
Well, they are taking over. In fact, funny you mentioned. Can you see this mug?
Yeah. Yep.
This is from Moscow, Idaho. I've been there a couple of times. I've researched Doug Wilson and his group and his survivors. And I intentionally drove there. It's only 2.5 hours or 2 hours and 15 minutes from me. And I intentionally went there to interview survivors. It is a highly destructive cult. But my mug came from Moscow, Idaho.
Well, I was mentioning that because I've read some things in the last, I guess maybe 6 months to a year, that said that people are flocking to that. And it is kind of shocking that it's like the appeal is apparently really strong from those of us on the outside are like you said, it's a cult, and it's really, really destructive. And there's a lot of, reasons we could go into, but just at a 1,000-foot view, this is really destructive and toxic. What do you think is the appeal where people say, that's exactly where I want to be? Like, I either want to be with that group or I want to be doing that same thing somewhere else in the country or in the world. Why do people like it?
Yeah, I mean, people literally come from overseas to Moscow to be a part of it. Well, he's got a charisma, and all cult leaders have a charismatic personality. So usually what happens is they will grasp onto a certain ideology that matches with them. And once you do that, and you kind of you dive deep into that ideology that matches yours, and then you go this way into another thing, and then you challenge it, and then you go, oh, okay, yeah, and then you go down. So I think that's kind of how it worked for me, and I think that's how it works for others, is that you first have one initial connection, you go deeper, then you go to either way on some other, and you challenge yourself and you see if you want to do that or if that makes sense. And you might dismiss that one and then move to another. But it's, just tapping into these different ideologies and eventually you're still surrounding yourself with these folks, and you're hearing it, and eventually you go a little bit deeper into each of the ideologies. You may not do them wholly, but you get a little bit deeper, and the longer you stay in that sphere, you're going to get deeper into those ideologies, and eventually you're really in. So it's a process. I don't think anybody just goes in and buys everything, but it's very engaging. It's and initially when you join any kind of cult, you're welcomed. You feel so good and welcomed and honored, and you establish these relationships, and it's all part of the love bombing that brings you there, makes you feel comfortable, and that allows you to settle and then get deeper. So yeah, it's definitely a process, and I know so many people who are at that cult. I know so many who have left it. It's very, very destructive, and they actually are taking over the town. They pretty much own most of Main Street. Yeah, it's crazy.
Crazy from an outsider's perspective. I know I'm not in it, but it definitely seems, it's hard to believe people really want that kind of life. But I get it too, that there's this sense that when you really believe all the things that they believe, then it becomes basically the best life. This is the best life ever. This is the best way. And I think what concerns a lot of us on the outside is when you look at the bigger picture, when you zoom out from a Doug Wilson and some of these other characters like that. And I grew up, by the way, with very, very heavily into John MacArthur. John MacArthur was my idol, for lack of a better term. I've listened to probably thousands of hours of him growing up. But when you look at that from a cultural perspective, and you're looking at things like the Trumpism stuff, the Roe versus Wade stuff, you look at this and you think, this isn't just some little niche groups that want to have a really strong, vibrant, thriving church. They're actually trying to dominate, like change, influence, and dominate our culture. Right. And I think it's kind of like, to borrow the phrase from Esther, like, for such a time as this, I feel like some of us that are developing platforms are becoming aware that we may be at a point where some of these people might have a shot at doing some stuff that you think they'll never do that, they'll never accomplish this, and there they are doing it. They're making it happen. And I remember, who was it? I forget the guy's name, but the guy that used to work for one of the Bushes, I think, on his campaign, he's like, I want to work real stealthily so the liberals can't see us, and come election day, you wake up in a body bag and like, you don't know what happened. It's over. And we get the sense, I think, that there's some people that really want to transform our culture in a negative way. And I don't know exactly the best way to respond to all of it, I admit, but I am concerned, and I feel like there's got to be some better way for people to realize this stuff is toxic. And if the wishes of people like John MacArthur and Doug Wilson and these other people come to pass, this country is going to be radically different. Do you share that fear, or do you feel like that's overstating the case?
No, I think it's a legitimate concern. These are people of high influence, and John MacArthur and Doug Wilson are given a free pass by most Christian evangelicals. And despite the fact that there is a litany of evidence of abuse and harm done at both of those, I'd say, institutions. They both have, schools. They both, so John MacArthur has the Master's University, the Master's Seminary, and along with the church. And Doug Wilson has NSA, New St. Andrews, and plus he has the publishing company. Plus he's over classical education. So yeah, I mean, they are very prominent people, and they're untouchable. But that's how cults work. You have a cult leader, and then you have the minions right underneath who circle them and protect them and shield them from anything. John MacArthur doesn't have to say a word. Phil Johnson and his friends I'll take the hits and, let them and shield him. Doug Wilson, he will engage people personally. He blocked me years ago, by the way. So if something's weird about that, he can't handle a woman challenging him, whatever. But
Exactly.
I've been posting against him for years and blogging against Doug Wilson for years. Interesting story. When I went to Moscow, his daughter-in-law figured it out that I was coming. And she actually sent me an email and said, "Can we have coffee?" And so I met with Heather Wilson. That's Nate Wilson's wife. And, had a really engaging conversation with her. And, but I kept on going back to the things that I had issues with. And she tried to reframe them this way. And she's a delightful person. I would be a good friend of hers if she weren't so hooked into her father-in-law. But yeah, I mean, all of these cult leaders, they have those people out there protecting them from people like me and people who are challenging them publicly. So that's how it works, and that's how they're able to keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the concern too that I have is that it seemed like a stretch to say that they could take over our country and make it a theocracy, I think is the word I'm looking for. But it also doesn't seem like, I mean, if they're potentially going to overturn Roe versus Wade, they're getting people on the highest court, which I know you wouldn't share this opinion, but in my opinion, they've stocked the highest court in our country with people that are grounded with their worldview in mythology. And like, that is a bit of a concern for me. And I feel like I'd love to start to see some people that are not of that persuasion in the highest court and in our government. And I'm not sure what it's going to take, but I feel like I want to speak up, and who knows, maybe I'll start running for something. I don't know.
Well, I would call myself pro-choice.
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah. And I don't like abortion, but what I understand is, we need to be providing tools for women, and
Yes.
we need better sex education, access to birth control. We need to be coming alongside women and helping them when they're in harm's way. So each woman has to decide for herself.
Do Christians give you
course.
slack for being pro-choice?
Well, I haven't really gone out. This is probably the first time I've ever said anything that publicly. But if you read my tweets, I'm very pro. Just be quiet. You need to be quiet when it comes to women in their journeys, because you don't even know. You let them take care of themselves, because you're not doing anything to help them out. And the churches have failed women. So I'm very sympathetic to women and in harm's way, whatever dire situation they're in. I'm very sympathetic towards them. And it's like, you only you know what you need to do. I can't make any of those kinds of decisions for you. So that's my pro-choice stance. I'm not a fan of abortion, but I just think women need to make that choice.
Yeah, well said. You're mentioning in general the whole idea of the church failing women, and I'd love to use that as a segue to take it back to your story. Could you tell us? I know you were speaking about how your husband was in the military at the time. You were in some charismatic churches. What happened next in your personal journey that kind of threw you off for a loop?
Okay, so one of the key things was my ex is really religious, and he came from a missionary family. So, I always honored him and his devotion time and made the kids be quiet so he could have his hours worth of devotion. I noticed a change in him when we went to a church in Virginia Beach. A certain pastor was kind of mentoring him. And now when I look back, I know what it was. It was Calvinism. So he got introduced to Calvinism and he became a different man. The way he thought spiritually was different. And there was a harshness that I hadn't seen before.
Just
And
for
I didn't
anyone that
know.
doesn't know that word, could you define what Calvinism is?
Well, Calvinism comes from John Calvin, and they believe this thing called tulip. And well, some of the doctrine is that only the elect, only God's elect can become Christian. And so you have to be one of the elect to be a Christian. God is sovereign. That means he controls every molecule. So basically he's controlling what I'm saying right now. That's one of their beliefs. And I think, no, I'm using my brain and I'm doing this talking, and no, God did not do this. So there are 5 key, they'll call them 5-point Calvinists, or some people will say, oh, I'm a 3-point Calvinist, because they take hold of 3 things that they believe. But anyway, there's 5-point Calvinists and there's 5 plus. John Piper would be more than 5-point. He takes it to the extreme. John MacArthur is a 5-point Calvinist. But it's just there's Calvinism and there's Arminianism, and that's where you choose to become a Christian. And anyway,
so Calvinism's like God, you believe in time because God pre-chose to make you one of his before time began. You're in the Lamb's book of life. Okay.
Yeah.
So just curious, and this is a question I'm not sure if I'd have an answer for because I was a Calvinist, but why do you think it breeds harshness? Because I'd agree it does, but why do you think it, did you ever figure out any connection as to what makes it do that?
Well, the ones who hold to that doctrine firmly believe that they're elect. And I think what it does is it kind of empowers them and emboldens them that they are right because God has elected them. And so they kind of look down on people who don't hold on to those doctrinal beliefs. And it's like a us versus them. I've just seen this over and over. And the guys, the Theo bros, the Theo dudes that I debate with on Twitter, they're almost always Calvinists. They have a harshness and a rudeness. It's unbelievable. They don't care about tone. They don't care about kindness. That doesn't mean anything. It's all about my way is right, my theology is right, and you're wrong. And I don't. They're just really hateful human beings when it comes to theology.
And a lot of it mix it with the presuppositional position too, where it just there's no way to understand reality unless you presuppose certain things, such as the Bible and God and so forth, and that this is the gospel, and that these are the truths, the bedrock truths. And if you don't assume them, reality is just stupid chaos. It's just absolute idiocy to try to find a worldview without these things, and you mix them all together. And I can see what you mean for sure, but I would add pride, a lot of pride.
Oh, it's definitely pride. And of course, the infallibility of Scripture. And then, their interpretation is always the correct interpretation. So it gets really, it gets heated on Twitter, let me tell you.
So you're saying your husband got exposed to this and he bought into it, basically?
He bought into it, and he bought into the perfect way of evangelizing, the perfect theology. He had to be right about everything, even young earth creationism. So we eventually got into more of the homeschool patriarchy stuff. We ended up in a cult, and the cult, what it was a high controlling church with a pastor who was staunchly Calvinist. He thought he was, John MacArthur Jr. He was ridiculous. But anyway, so into purity and modesty and stuff like that. And it caused harm to a lot of people. My daughter, who was 21, she decided she couldn't handle it anymore, and she left the home abruptly. And this is a culture where you're hoping your daughter's going to end up in a courtship, and then you're going to give her your blessing and she's going to go on and continue the cycle, right? And she said, I've had enough of this and I'm out of here. And it was shocking. And yet all of us, to me, it was like, I think she's right. And from the moment I was in that church, I hated it. I tried to like it because I was trying to be the submissive wife and go along with it. And part of me would go, okay, this is okay, this is okay, this is okay. But then underneath there was still, I was not happy and it was really uncomfortable. So after my daughter left, it caused me to think through some more. And then I started asking on the sidelines, and women would come up and tell me stuff that was going on and the harm that they were experiencing. And I finally told my husband, I can't be here anymore. It's like he's battering us spiritually. And I need to find a new church. And for me to say that with my 7 kids, well, then at that time it was 6 kids, that I can't do that. Church is something sacred that you do as a family. So for me to say, I need to leave. And I was singing and playing the piano on the worship team, and I was the primary musician. So for me to say that, he took notice, and he even went to a friend who was on staff and said, my wife is saying she wants to leave. And that person on staff said, you need to listen to her. He was also seeing the truth. And my husband kind of blew it off. The church kind of imploded at that time. And I really wanted my husband to own why we needed to leave. I wanted him to, I didn't want to lead that, because husbands were supposed to lead. I wanted him to own that experience and say, yeah, that was an unhealthy church. And so he did see some things that he would say was unhealthy, and we did eventually leave. And so that was good. And we got into healthier places. But later on, a few years later, I was thinking about the damage that was done to especially our youth who are now college age. And all of them were acting out sexually in really extreme ways. Everybody, a lot of kids will act out sexually as they go through the teens and early adulthood. These kids were going above and beyond that level of normalcy. And it really was upsetting to me because I was also seeing heavy drug use and other issues. It's like, this was a small church to have that high percentage of young adults act out like this. I knew it was because of that pastor. I knew it. And so I wrote a negative review, a Google review, and said, this is not a healthy place. If you have a family, do not send your kids here. And I explained some of the reasons. And it was because of that negative Google review that he sued me for defamation, $500,000. I also had started a blog about this, and come to find out that people who had been in his church 10 years earlier were contacting me and saying, oh yeah, I had that experience too. I left. And so anyway, this was ongoing, and it was a smaller church, about 100 at the most. So, this was a tried and true, high controlling abuser. And
can I ask you, how did he deal with that passage that talks about not taking your brothers and sisters in Christ to the pagan courts? Like, how did he deal with that?
Oh, that's funny, because right at the time where he was suing me was the Shepherds Conference. That's the big conference of John MacArthur. They invite pastors and church leaders to go, only men. And he met with a pastor there, and somehow and was talking about me and wanting to sue me. And that pastor somehow, in his mind, gave him the green light to sue me. And so he even publicly said, a pastor from John MacArthur's church gave him permission. Well, Phil Johnson got all up in arms about that and said, no, we don't think that that's right. but he wrote this 19-page kind of manifesto of justification of why he could sue me.
It's a really good case study of like just the power trips that people get on with these positions where like obviously yours is very specific to that situation, but just even broadly to all of us who would sit in a congregation, like this is as if it were the voice of God to you. And did you get the sense that people had any, like apart from the more intense topics, just that people could have a different opinion, like just pick one out of the hat, but say he was into sprinkling babies for baptism and someone said, no, I really, really, really feel like baptism's only for people who have a profession of faith, meaning you have to be a teenager or an adult. And like, could you differ with him at all? Or was it like, my word is it?
Well, pretty much my word is it. People would have differing opinions, but they wouldn't voice them. So, that's what any cult leaders, you have to fall in line with their beliefs. Yeah.
A lot of fear behind the scenes, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. And especially because of shunning. I've probably 6 months ago, someone reached out to me and said that their loved one is in that church and they've cut off all contact. So even people, outside of the family are going to be cut off. It's kind of like other cults that you're familiar with. Like Scientology. It's ridiculous. I felt guilty. Like I said, I'm a pianist, and I was accompanying at a high school, and I felt guilty for missing the Wednesday service because there was a concert that my kid was, and I was playing the piano for. Yeah, it's that kind of, he never said a word to me, and that's the way cults work. He doesn't have to talk. It's an understood vibe that you get, and you need to fall in line with that.
Yeah, we're gonna pay for it. I'm just curious, take us back just one small step. For anyone that isn't really familiar with the whole purity culture, which I know is probably more like, you could subdivide it into the modesty culture, purity culture / virginity culture, and also the shame culture. Could you just explain a little bit of what that looks like in general, and also what it looked like in your church and your family in terms of the teachings that you were given, and just why it can be so incredibly negative for a lot of people?
Well, the purity culture that I was involved with started, we started with like a ceremony. We bought our daughter a purity ring, and it's basically the dad, put it on your left finger, where you, where the wedding ring would go. And it's saying, I'm going to stay pure until I get married.
Would you say that there's a sense of that women are treated at all as property? Like, you belong under your daddy's umbrella. He kind of owns you and he's responsible for your purity. Yeah. And when you get married, he's like passing you to another man's ownership. Is that a stretch, or would you agree with that?
No, that's pretty legitimate. I mean, even the dads are approving of whoever they're courting, so everything has to go through the father.
Interesting side anecdote. I'll just throw this in real quick. I did not grow up in an ultra Calvinistic group, but when I was looking for a wife, I'd become a Calvinist at that point, and I was not aware of all the little rules that maybe someone that grew up in it would have been. And I became quickly aware that you don't talk to the girl first, you talk to her daddy. And if you do that in the wrong order, it doesn't work out so well. And they shut you down pretty quickly. Well, there was a young lady that I was interested in at least getting to know. And I did the right thing, and I approached her daddy. And we went through several interviews, of course, as you do. And his end result was he disqualified me because I didn't know enough about church history. He felt like I knew some, but not enough. It wasn't like really rock solid church. I couldn't just stand up and give a class on church history. And I found it ironic that years later, going to my story here, that part of my deconversion from Christianity was a very deep dive into most of the origins of Christianity and Judaism, but also of church history, and realizing how much, that there were many Christianities at first, not one, and that they were just like today, there were political groups fighting, and the winners got to rewrite history and say, we've always been the real Christianity. These other groups are the splinters, so treat them as the heretics and the apostates, but we've kept the, the truth, because God gave it to us from the beginning. And realizing that was a very distorted version of what happened with church history. And I find it ironic that when I did finally become sort of a much better educated on church history, that's actually part of what got me out. So kind of funny.
Wow. The thing about the purity culture and the courtship, some of these ideologies, I think it's important to note that there wasn't any one way to do it. Each family would decide how to do it. Like I have friends who did the courtship thing, and each one had different rules. So, like you mentioned, go to the dad first. That didn't necessarily always happen. So, some people had it figured out their way, but, you had to basically align with the other parents, right? So we didn't get into that because by that time we were moving out of that.
Gotcha. Would you say that there was a lot of pressure put on women both to maintain their virginity, but also to see themselves as inherently tempting just by virtue of the fact that they have curves or whatever, and that if they didn't cover up enough skin and handle themselves correctly with not being in any way accentuating their curves, that they would effectively be tempting their brothers in Christ, and that part of their responsibility was to say, yes, perhaps we should say men need to control themselves, but also men are kind of out of control in their minds, therefore you're responsible in some senses. And I know that comes into play with some of the even non-Christian discussions about rape culture, where it's like, just because a girl wears a low-cut blouse and a miniskirt does not mean she's asking to be assaulted. And like, how did that play out in your experience in your church, the church you're mentioning, and other churches? Was there a healthy perspective on that, or how did that play out?
No, it was very unhealthy. And he had even extra rules. I mean, when somebody got married, he felt he needed to inspect the bride's dress to see if it was modest enough. Yeah, he said we had to wear shorts to the knees. And you can't tell, but I'm 6'4", and my sons are up to 6'10". And
Wow.
let me tell you, you cannot find shorts that go down to the knees. And so, people would tattle on my kids because they didn't have long enough shorts. And frankly, that's one where I just rolled my eyes. It's like, you know what? And he was into no co-ed swimming. And we actually went to a family camp where there was swimming and you could see shoulders and things like that. And I frankly just blew that off. But what I noticed with my boys was the preoccupation with skin, because there was so much emphasis on can't show your shoulders, you can't wear a sleeveless top or anything. And my boys were going nuts. If a woman was jogging on the street, they were like, she shouldn't be wearing that. And if there was something on TV where they saw a woman in a bikini or something, they would race to the TV and turn it off. And I finally got disgusted and said, no more doing this. It doesn't matter. I go, everywhere we go, there are women dressed in all different ways. And we need to stop this. And, I just put a stop to it. And as soon as I did that, my boys were just so much healthier. And we just didn't even discuss it anymore. So I kind of rebelled against that pastor. But yeah, it's very unhealthy. And I just saw that my boys wanted to police everybody. That's the culture that pastor created. Every woman walking on the street, they were going through this checklist. Does she pass? Does she pass? So that's ridiculous. So I was able to have good conversations with I have 5 boys. And so I was able to have good conversations with them and say, yeah, that's not healthy. We don't look at how they dress. We look at them and who they are as individuals.
Yeah. Do you think that the church in general is doing a good job? Not meaning your specific church that we're talking about now, but just the church in general in this country, at helping people to have a healthy view of sexuality and being really well prepared for marriage in that realm?
No, not at all. And what's really good is that this is getting out there. Sheila Gregoire is doing some phenomenal work on married sex and, just the topic of, don't deprive each other, and the idea that women are responsible for men lusting, and men have this higher sex drive and all this stuff. And she's proven that wrong. She's saying, she's doing phenomenal work in the Christian community, and doing statistics, and just saying this is enough. We need to stop this behavior. So I really appreciate what she's doing.
Yeah, I have two quick stories. I remember as a kid when I was too young to even understand what sex was. I remember in the church, a young girl getting up and apologizing on a Sunday evening to the church for having gotten pregnant. I don't remember the guy being there, but it was her apology to say, I'm sorry I did this. I'm going to take care of the baby, but I'm going to, stop being promiscuous from this point forward. And I remember thinking, even at that age, just thinking she looks like she's drenched in shame. And it didn't feel very healthy even at that young age. And I feel really bad for people that there is a scarlet letter. Like because some people do play the part well. And they say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do the right thing. And I'm not going to cross certain lines. And they don't, or at least they don't do it in public and no one ever knows. And they look good. But then there are some people that's just too much. And they do certain things with in the sexual realm. And if it's discovered, especially if it's made public, they get an absolute scarlet letter. And I've seen that a number of times in life. And I feel so bad for the people where it's like, this is such a beautiful part of life, such a wonderful thing to celebrate. Obviously, it's powerful and you need to be wise in your choices, but it's not something to shame each other over. And I feel so sad for people that are going through that.
It's really sad. And, especially when you hear it from the pulpit, yet what are the statistics? Over 50%, definitely over 50% of pastors are doing porn. So it's like, really, you're going to talk about sexual purity, but you're not walking the talk. So yeah, it's really disturbing, the amount of shame that women have to deal with. Yeah.
Can I ask, since we're on this topic about pastors and all that, do you think some of this stuff is endemic? It's just part of the system. Like for example, you could look at something like the Duggar situation with Josh Duggar and say he was a one-off. He was, a lone wolf in this kind of stuff. He didn't, there's others that are obviously not doing that. But then you start to add up this list of all these pastors that are doing things like this, all these churches where they're having scandals. And it does at least make me wonder, is there some sense in which the issue is not some bad leaders? The issue is what's actually happening with the worldview. Do you ever kind of attack at that from that direction? Do you feel like that's got any merit?
Well, Duggar was influenced by Bill Gothard. Bill Gothard basically wrote the rule book on how to sexually abuse and get away with it, for men. And, if you look at Bill Gothard's materials, he absolutely blames women for their modesty, and causing men to stumble. So immediately, Josh Duggar was given a free pass to sexually abuse because he was trained by the Bill Gothard rulebook. And as you know, Bill Gothard also sexually abused, and he carefully wrote those, his rule book so that he could get away with it. And it's disgusting. Bill Gothard influenced Doug Phillips, who was a prominent dude in the Christian homeschool movement. My blog broke that case with Lourdes Torres, and he had a sexual relationship with his nanny. So they all follow that same rule book. It's all blame the women, blame the modesty. They're temptresses. They are easily deceived. I remember getting an argument with Doug Wilson about Doug Phillips on the Lourdes case. And Doug Wilson said, Lourdes didn't scream out, didn't cry out. There's a verse in the Old Testament where if the woman doesn't cry out, then it's not legitimate rape, or it's not legitimate sexual assault or whatever. So, all of these high-ranking public figure Christian dudes, leaders, use these same rule books and get away with all kinds of crap. It's really disgusting.
But in terms of just the theology, like when you what I'm thinking of in part is the actual stories in the Bible. When you
Oh,
look at Adam and Eve, for example, let's start at the beginning. Very good place to start from the Sound of Music. Eve is obviously pegged. She's obviously was framed, and in the sense, Yahweh framed her. But in terms of just the way it reads, she was the first one who was deceived. And I think it was First Timothy talks about how, in terms of gender roles and so forth, that Eve being deceived was in the transgression, and that she was the one who basically started this whole thing. We're in the sense of the judicialness of Romans, we're in Adam, but Eve was basically the one that started this whole thing, and then he fell for it. When you look at the bigger picture of the true big scope of Judaism, the book of Enoch plays heavily into how the Old Testament and the New Testament formed. And the book of Enoch does it even further. The book of Enoch, with the watchers, the fallen angels who were so severely tempted by the women that they had to copulate with them and then create the giants, the Nephilim. That dominated the theology of the ancient Jews, as all the way up to the New Testament. It's quoted in the New Testament over 150 times. The book of Enoch is. And so you're like, okay, they were steeped in this theology that said even the angels that had stood in God's presence couldn't take it because women were just so seductive. Eve couldn't be trusted. She caused this wonderful innocent man to fall. And it's like the theology right from the get-go says women are really a problem. Whether you're talking about a man or the very angels from heaven, women cause trouble. And do you think that plays a part in where some of these guys are coming from?
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you can look at the hatred that John MacArthur has towards women. Beth Moore, go home. I mean,
Yeah.
that's hatred. That's contempt. There's nothing loving about that. You know, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Women are hated.
It's ironic too that some of the books that they're quoting from in the New Testament, meaning like the pastoral epistles, a majority of non-fundamentalist scholars don't think they're even written by Paul. They think they're written by other people much, much, much later, which is ironic. But in terms of going back to your story, so I understand that you were in this church. Could you tell us more about like your family dynamics with your kids? Like how are they dealing with it sounds like you were shifting your views while still at the church. Like how are you all interplaying this? And was there any question about, should we even be going to this church anymore? Like, how did you deal with that?
I didn't deal with my kids. It was pretty much with my husband. I didn't want to come across as as divided.
Yeah.
So I wanted him to own it so that we had a united front. Eventually we did, and we went to the other churches and, did have more united. From that point on, we'd started doing things differently, and I didn't even ask my husband permission. I put my kids in youth group just so they could experience normalcy, at the new church where we weren't doing youth group before. I just felt like they needed to connect with other kids and have fun. And yeah, it was a journey for sure. I don't think my older kids understood what was going on, and they were harmed. My two oldest for sure were.
Would you say that in terms of your marriage dynamics, that you were walking away from complementarianism and becoming more of an egalitarian?
Oh no. I mean, no, I was not. But I was treading on dangerous territory because I was challenging my husband, you see. And so we stayed in Oregon a little bit longer. He got laid off, and then we moved to where I am right now. And we were at a Baptist church. And that's when I got sued. And
that must have been so crazy to get that
it
notice.
really was crazy. And so what happened is my story went viral, and my blog went absolutely crazy with people telling me their spiritual abuse stories. And I realized, you know what, there is a place, people need a safe place to tell their stories. And so that's what I kind of when, I would tell a little bit about my story, and then the comments kind of became like a support group, of people just sharing their experiences. And then I started doing, reporting on high profile cases, CJ Mahaney and Sovereign Grace Ministries, and Doug Phillips and Doug Wilson and James McDonald, and, all kinds of high profile stories that, people would reach out to me and share their personal story, and I'd post them. And it was a very active blog, very, very active. Tens of thousands of hits a day. And
Can I ask, what
so,
did you think about that one about the rise and fall of Mars Hill or Mars Church, whatever it is?
you
Did you
know
think
what,
that that was a
I never listened to that. I had
okay?
covered Mark Driscoll for years, and frankly, I have a bad taste in my mouth with Christianity Today, because I've posted some really high profile stories, and they did not give the survivors the time of day. They gave a full page to Tullian Chividjian. They gave a full page to Ravi Zacharias. They gave a full page to Mark Driscoll. And I knew these reporters. One of the cool things is that my stories, my blog, it has been respected. And journalists will quote from my blog because I have a good track record. I've done my work. But yet they weren't, and I've got all these reporters, journalists in my cell phone, because we've reached out to each other, and they would ask me questions and stuff. But it was so upsetting that they would, give a full page to a known abuser. And I'm going, dude, I've got the survivor here. Don't you want a statement? And a number of times they knowingly posted a whole page, like Ravi Zacharias. That one really upset me. And I can give a statement from, I have 19 pages from Lori Ann Thompson, the clergy sexual abuse survivor of Ravi Zacharias. And they didn't even want that. So I was furious about that. So I didn't give that podcast the time of day. It's like, this is old news. I already know that stuff. I don't need to hear it again.
Yeah, I'm sure. Do you feel like churches, at least in the groups we're talking about, that there is a tendency to, by and large, assume that the party that's making the claim is probably making it up? And
yeah, that's typically the way it works. And I get thrown under the bus for sharing the story. And, now I'm not doing this actively because I'm working full time after my divorce. But yeah, I mean, they're kind of stupid because my track record is 100%, it's all proven to be true. So, if I were doing this, they'd be foolish to be, dissing on me.
Yeah.
Because I do my work, I mean, I expect to see the evidence before I'm going to post it publicly. I've already been sued once. I don't want to be sued again. So I'm not going to risk that. But yeah, in general, those people, they rally around their favorite leader and defend them and blame survivors and me for posting this stuff. So yeah.
Do you think that the church and just the biblical perspective in general lends to some of this by virtue of the fact that they want to be quick to forgive? And I'm not just saying forgiveness. Obviously, we all need to be forgiving and gracious. The world wouldn't work very well if we weren't. But just in the sense of someone saying, yeah, they messed up. So what? We're all terrible sinners. If we were honest with ourselves, and if the books of heaven were open, whatever the worst is that you think of me, I am much worse inside in God's eyes. And the sin in me is vileness. And so sin pops up and does something bad, or I do something. Of course, that's what human sinfulness is. We need to be quick to forgive. And especially when you look at the track record of some of the heroes of the Bible, where, like King David, for example, he was obviously an adulterer. He, murdered some, Uriah so that he could have Bathsheba. And I know that's not what happened. It's not history, but just in the mythology, that in this story, you've got this bastion of faith. We sing his psalms in our hymn book, and he's a really bad guy. And honestly, if King David were a pastor today, he'd be on your blog you'd be saying, this guy is a bad pastor. Do not ever sing his songs. Do not buy his books. He should not be speaking in conferences. King David is a jerk, and he's a really bad abuser. Lot, he was willing to offer his 2 daughters to be raped, and then they obviously, when they thought they were at the end of the world, they got him drunk, and then he got them both pregnant on separate nights in the story. And in the New Testament, I believe it's Hebrews or James, says he was a righteous man. And it's like this whole system has people that, if it happened today, they'd be on the front pages, abuser, horrible, his career is over, he's shipwrecked. And yet they're part of our history as heroes. Like, do you get the sense that that's part of where we're too quick to forgive, because we've got this beautiful track record of, number one, God forgave us, but God forgave King David, God forgave Lot. He forgives the worst of us. Why are we making a big deal of it if God doesn't? Do you think that's part of this problem?
Well, I think that those who excuse abusers will latch on to that. But frankly, in the Bible, I see Ezekiel 34, I see all over scripture where it's talking about pride and sexual temptation and, how a leader should behave. There are plenty of verses that talk about wholesome, good character, morals. And so to dismiss all of that, I think that that's just foolishness. It's pretty clear what a good leader is. And, Jesus modeled that with servant leadership. When you see somebody have pride and haughtiness and that kind of behavior, what you're usually going to find is they're going to, someone in that kind of sphere of influence, usually there's going to be a downfall, and it often connects with money or sexual misbehavior is how we find out about it. But
I mean, do you think though that we should be singing the Psalms of David?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a great question. What is that expression where the clock is always right 2 times a day or something like that?
Yeah.
I mean, so how do you do that? I mean, there is truth, but there's also a lot of stuff that's not. So, what do we do with these books that famous pastors have authored who are fallen now? Do we throw them all out, or did they have some truth in them? So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but truth is truth, I believe. And I don't know. That's a great question.
Well, I want to make sure I get back to your story too. What happened next in your story with after you were sued? And I want to make sure we get the punchline. How did that lawsuit end up?
Oh, okay. So I was referred to a phenomenal attorney who actually taught attorneys on the First Amendment cases and the anti-SLAPP law, which is a phenomenal law that helps defamation lawsuits get through the court process a lot quicker. Basically, what it does, it's a countersuit, and it requires that the plaintiffs have to provide proof that there was defamation. So they have to prove that I lied intentionally and I did it with malice. So it circumvents the normal court process where there would be discovery, and it shortens everything. So it was done. I was sued, I think, middle of February, and it was done kind of the end of July. So that's very quick.
Yeah.
And it was dismissed because even though I can't remember how many there were 30 to 40 phrases that they called were defamatory, and not even one phrase met the first level of the definition of defamation. And both have to be met. So it was clearly dismissed. And so the pastor had to pay. Actually, he signed his name and the church. So basically his church had to pay for my attorney and all court costs. And there were 5 people that were sued. I was only one of 5. My daughter was sued as well because she left a negative review. So anyway, he had to pay for all of those attorney fees and court costs. So that was good.
That's a crazy situation. I mean, it honestly sounds like a bully, though. I mean, just standing back without knowing the details, it sounds like he's a bully.
Well, yeah. I mean, what kind of a pastor is going to sue a mom of how many children?
Yeah.
At that time, that $500,000, that was more than our house cost. What kind of pastor does that? A bully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to ask too. You were talking before about your husband with Calvinism, and I'm assuming patriarchy became part of that. How did that all play out in your marriage?
Yeah. So in the process of blogging, there were quite a few people who were egalitarian, and I didn't understand complementarian versus egalitarian. I had no idea what complementarian meant. And finally I learned it. And basically I kind of kept quiet about it because I still believed it. I allowed people to just share whatever in the comments, because like I said, it was a group communication. And
could you define it real quick, just for anyone that doesn't know what we're talking about?
Yeah, complementarian basically is patriarchy. It means husband ruling over the wives and wives submit to the husband. And egalitarian is equal partnership. So not one over the other. And that's what I had been raised to believe for years in the Christian community. I don't even know what I believed in the Catholic, but that definitely was a part of my Christian upbringing.
Male leadership, male headship.
Yeah, male leadership. Yeah. So, I was entertaining those comments, like I said, in my blog. One woman invited me to go to a biblical, well, it's BCE, Biblical for Christian Equality, I think is what it is. Anyway, it was a conference. And I went to this conference, and there were men, who were, they were biblical scholars. And for the first time, I think I wept. I wept realizing, whoa, I did not know this. And so a lot of the King James Version was, highly patriarchal. And so some of the original languages didn't have that. So that was new to me and very enlightening. So I slowly started changing, kind of getting on my own 2 feet. And, I think that my husband was sensing that. And it was 2012. He came to me and he said that I'm destroying my family. And he had his Bible in his hand. And he says, you're leading our family in, and you're not submitting to me. And it was really harsh what he said to me, and just, I'm destroying my family because I'm not submitting to him. And he said this was going to be the hardest thing he's ever said to me. And he was kind of yelling. It was horrible. And I realized
just insisting you submit.
Yeah. And there was a while before he had said something to me, and I said, you're not my Holy Spirit. You don't get to control my faith. I don't have to go through you to God. And so this was welling up, these issues. And I think at that point I knew the end was coming. And I can't remember how long after that. I had set an ultimatum basically and said, I need to see some changes. And also he was pulling away from me, not communicating with me. This is so weird. He would not talk to me face to face. He would only talk to me if he was standing up and I was sitting down. It was the weirdest thing. And even then it was about kids or, logistic things. There was never any talk about our relationship. He just shut down and refused to connect with me in any meaningful way as a husband and wife. And I did get my church involved, and my pastor told him he needs to get into therapy, and he refused. We did go to some marriage counseling, which never is appropriate when there's spiritual abuse or emotional abuse, and that counselor said, again, you're not your wife's Holy Spirit, and my husband stormed out. So, there was never any more progress on our marriage. And I knew I gave him 1 year to make some changes, and he didn't. I gave him another year without telling him. And then at the second year, I went back to school. I realized I've got to get my self prepared. And so I spent 4 years. We were living separately. He lived upstairs, I lived downstairs. Our bedrooms were separate. And so it was really, really hard. Thankfully, we had a big house, but we only connected when it came to the kids. And I went to school 4 years, living in that environment. I felt like I was having a heart attack at times. I went to the doctor and they said, no, it's anxiety. I think it's anxiety. Let's try this medication. If that works, then we know it's anxiety. So I got on antidepressants, anti-anxiety, and then I was able to finish. It got rid of the symptoms, and sure enough, that helped me so I could get through school. It was very, very hard, trying to be mom and going to school full time, learning technology, which was not my forte, and trying to get a job. Eventually, my two daughters wrote me a long emails and said, we're going to distance ourselves from you unless you file for divorce. So wow. They said, we won't let you around our kids, whatever, if you don't get yourself out of that environment. So
how did you take that?
I was devastated, but I knew it was true. I knew I knew I needed to do that path. I had already started that, but it was just so dang hard, because I hadn't been in the workforce. I had all these kids at home. So I finally, when I woke up on my, what birthday was it? Whatever birthday it was, I said, this year is the last year I will be married to this man. And so that was July. and October, I filed for divorce, even without having a job lined up. So it's like I got to the end of my rope, and finally got a job, moved out, and was divorced. So I've been divorced almost 2 years in July, I think. He got married less than 3 months after our divorce was final. It's been hard. I know. Yeah. He wore his wedding ring almost through the whole entire process, acting like, he still loved me, and he didn't. So what's really great is that I still have all my kids, I was afraid that they would abandon, me, because I left the family home, but nope, they're here. They're here. They come over. So it's been a hard journey, really hard. It's hard to change your life at this stage of the game where legitimately I should be, my kids should be all graduate, almost graduated, prime of my life, dealing with grandbabies and, volunteer work. My ex is an electrical engineer, so I would have been a happy stay-at-home mom, doing whatever you do in the golden years. But now I'm starting my career, literally starting my career. I'm 2.5 years in now.
As I hear that story, I'm just obviously stunned by some of the details and heartbroken that you had to go through it. It does bring up kind of a question that I wanted to get to anyway, and it's a great place to put this question in. But when you're a long-term victim of emotional abuse, and I know for some people it's physical abuse, but for sure emotional abuse and sometimes spiritual abuse, when spirituality is mixed into those discussions, and it just feels like this chronic abuse is suffocating you. It's like it's just ripping you to shreds. You feel like you're living a nightmare every day for years. And I mean, basically, you could step back and say, I feel like I've been emotionally raped for a
Yeah.
decade or
Yeah.
more. And it's like, how do you heal from that? And how do you start to get regrounded and say, I've got a new life? Because that's a lot of stuff to work through.
It's a ton of stuff to work through, and see, it affects me even to this day. Yeah, I'm in therapy. I was in therapy through the divorce process, and then I got out, and I thought I was doing okay, but then, it comes back. So, and my childhood was filled with abuse as well. So, um, I think that we were naturally attracted to each other because of our abusive backgrounds, that often happens. So, it's relearning and figuring out how to handle life in healthy ways. And yeah, so it's a lot of therapy.
Hmm.
Yeah, it takes a lot of work.
How would you encourage someone in terms of both relationship dynamics as well as like a church dynamic and spiritual topics dynamics, where they've never really felt that they're powerful enough or brave enough to say something sounds wrong here? Like whether you're deconstructing your faith or just looking at a church leadership, the way that someone like a Bill Gothard relates to his secretaries, whatever it is, just to say something sounds wrong here. And what I mean by that is, I think so many of the people that I talk with that are deconstructing and deconverting from Christianity, not leaving a bad church, but leaving Christianity wholesale. One of the things that comes up a lot is we had this mentality of you don't question it, number one, because
Yeah.
we just know that we know that the Bible's true and Jesus is Lord and so forth, and the gospel is where it's at. His death and resurrection is the only way to be saved and be right with God. You just don't question it. These are the basics. But also, like, there's this dynamic that's set up of he's the king, you're the subject, you're the slave. He's in charge, he knows everything, and you know so little. You're like a worm. The worm theology coming in. You don't have the right to say, God, why did you do this? Even in Romans 9, it talks about, why does the thing formed say to the person who made it, why'd you make me this way? You don't question your maker. And for people to have, for the first time, the chance to say, something's wrong here. I think I'm going to take the seat as the judge this time and say, I'm no longer going to sit back and just be receiving whatever happens passively. I'm going to take action and say, if this doesn't sound right, I'm going to pursue the truth wherever it takes me. And if I have to make a radical choice that includes being shunned or ostracized, I think I'm willing to take it. Like, how do people develop that bravery when they've never really had a chance to do that before and even been encouraged? You need to not question yourself. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Do not lean on your own understanding. You are a person who has a warped perspective on everything apart from Christ and apart perhaps from your pastor, your spiritual leaders. Don't be prideful. Don't assume that you can question things because you don't understand. And for people to say for the first time, I'm going to take that role. It's hard to do it if you've never done it, especially if you've been really, really in a submissive, passive role for a long time. How do you get started on that journey and say, I'm taking the power back? I'm getting a voice for the first time.
You mentioned that verse, but I could also study to show yourself approved. So, there's both sides of the coin on the Bible as far as, gaining knowledge and whatnot. The way that I do things now is I do question everything. And even, I'm dating now. So I have this Excel spreadsheet. You'll laugh at me, but as I'm dating somebody, one little red flag, I'm making a note of it. Because a lot of times you just dismiss things. Oh, that's just a quirky little whatever. It's like, no, I make a note of it and I watch and see if there's a pattern. And on all kinds of topics, from how does he treat my kids? How does he deal with finances? That kind of stuff. And so with spirituality, the same thing. And with leaders, the same thing. With my work, I'm watching this, how our team works together and how the leaders are treating the employees. So I do this in all aspects of my life now, is I'm observing, I'm watching how people respond. I'm watching how leaders treat other people. And if I see something, a red flag, I take note and, you know, I acknowledge it. I don't dismiss it. And I will, look back on that. And I think that's the first step. It's first trusting yourself to notice those things that you may not have noticed before. Now I'm not very trusting, obviously, because I've been in really difficult relationships and then also difficult church situations. And I've reported on tons and tons and tons of really unhealthy and in fact abusive church situations. So I'm basically trained just by default, through my blogging and absorbing so many stories. I can see these patterns clearly. If someone sends me their story, I'm reading and I go, circle this, circle this, circle this, because I see the issues now. You become an expert at what is not healthy. So that's what I think people need to do, is become an expert at unhealthiness and, let that guide you.
Yeah, that's a good word. I like that. It reminds me of some of the things, even from the fraud world, I would hear, I didn't ever deal with physical money, but I remember people talking about how they would train people to detect what was counterfeit and what was real. And
yeah,
I was dealing more with looking at browsers, cookies and flash cookies and browser types and browser languages and looking for hackers. But you begin to what looks normal and what pops. You're like, okay, this person's always logging on from Chicago. They're always using an English browser. All of a sudden, it's in a different language. It's from such and such a location. It's far away. Either they're using a VPN or we got a problem. And that kind of stuff. And things, I agree, things do sort of pop once you have your spidey senses up. You begin to see things better. And I think a lot of us, don't want to be accusatory to the church, but I think a lot of us just weren't trained in how to detect that. It was like you were just trained to love the Lord, have your devotions every day, and focus on not sinning, being pure, like we talked about. And then in terms of the bigger life decisions, trust in the Lord for your job, pursue a godly woman. And it's like it's almost like you need a little bit of a psychological addition to that. It's like not like all that is bad in and of itself, but like you need to understand there's some psychology here. And if you're not careful, you can get absolutely taken for a ride by people without even knowing it happened. And it's interesting that I think I'm seeing that more and more in the stories that I'm observing from both people coming out of the church to be, deconverted, or just coming out and saying, I need a break. This is not healthy.
Yeah, I agree.
Can I ask a couple of last questions here to wrap up? Anger. You've probably heard the phrase angry atheist. A lot of atheists do go through that phase. I think I missed a lot of it, but I'm sure it's part of who I am. But the idea behind it, of course, is you feel gypped. You feel like, this is so upsetting that I wasn't told, and whatever it is, I was told there were 4 gospels. I wasn't told there were 60. I was told there's 1 book of Acts, not 6. I was told, again, that quotes Enoch twice, not 150 times in the New Testament. I was not told all these things, and it just doesn't seem fair that they didn't tell me where this thing came from. And people get really angry, and especially when you mix in the toxic stuff we've been talking about. And so people exit and they're really, really angry. And I could see a similar thing happening even for people who decide, I'm not leaving Christianity. I'm trying to pursue a healthier version of it. But I could see people really struggling with just being angry and bitter for a long time. How do you think people can deal with these things up front, not sugarcoat it, be real about what's happening, but at the same time, not be out to get everybody and put everybody into the same bucket and say everybody's, a bad person, or to like, I know there's a point of wanting to expose people too, especially people that can hurt people. But obviously there's people that are just struggling with daily life. We're not trying to put everybody under a microscope and say we're the only ones that have a good, healthy perspective on a topic. How do you keep from being bitter about all these things? And like, how do you personally deal with it? And how do you think the church should deal with or people that are leaving the church, not necessarily again for deconverting, but just for a break even or a healthier perspective, how can we be less bitter? And maybe as a parallel question, just to take the tone of some of our conversations down, because I personally struggle with that, because I feel like I see the reality that people should be upset that they weren't told where this book came from. They don't, even starting way back, what's the origins of the Yahweh character? Where did he come from? Tell us the very basics, and they didn't. So we feel gypped. And yet, if we're not careful, we can become kind of like we were fundamentalists before. Like we're fundamentalists in Bible and in Jesus and the gospel. We can kind of become fundamentalists in our anger and say, like, we're the only ones. It's black and white. There's no gray area. And you all are the bad people, and I'm the right one. It's like that's what we came from. We came from you all are bad, and I'm on the good side. You're the bad side. And I think there's a real danger that I face myself in my own heart, and in other people I think have admitted as much too, that we tend to do the same things, like we're creatures of habit, and we are switching our worldviews. We don't bow our knee anymore to Yahweh or Jesus or the Bible, but we're still very much black and white. There's no gray area, and we know everyone else but us is the bad guy. How do you deal with that in your own heart and with other people?
Yeah, that's hard, because I still am somewhat on the front lines dealing with a lot of these issues. And I just, frankly, I just don't have time for some of these dudes. It's like, get over yourself. You kind of get angry.
Yep.
Because I'm the one who sees the fallout of, the harm done, and, deals with it front and center with so many people. And it's very maddening knowing that these basically spiritual bullies are still being spiritual bullies. But for me personally, there is a process. It's a recovery process, and you've got to deal with it. You've got to deal with all that anger. And I do go to church. I haven't been in probably a month now, but the church that I go to is chill. They don't take attendance, and they don't ask, where have you been? They never ask that. They know my story, and they're just, really sweet when I'm there, and very gracious. It's a small church, and, it's just a healthy place. So you got to find your healthy places. So I know that your audiences, many have deconverted, but you've got to find your healthy places where you can be accepted and loved. But you also need to do your anger work. And there's some really big losses that you experienced when you've gone through this kind of harm. And not only the emotional and the spiritual, but physically, you spent a lot of hours dealing with this stuff and wrestling with it. And also relationships that you've lost probably. So there's loss, and there's grieving. So I think just like any kind of loss, you're going to go through a grieving process where there's the anger and the back and forth, just bargaining, and eventually you get to a place where it's like, okay, yeah, I went through that, and I'm still standing on my 2 feet, and I can move forward now. So I think that's important to take yourself through that journey, allow yourself to feel the full range of emotions as you grieve, and then be mindful of how you are responding today. Is it a polar opposite of what you were doing while you were in the church? Are you, like you were saying, you could easily go back to the black and white thing, or can you just be gracious, not just, Christian word there, but, just be accommodating and accepting of people where they are on their faith journey or their non-faith journey.
Yeah. Well, on that note, do you ever struggle with anger against the God you believe in the sense of, like, when I was a Christian, I would put it like, God, why didn't you do this or that? And I think some of my issues were probably more low level compared to the issues that you deal with. But like when you talk about some of the more really painful and even criminal actions that are happening, It's like, God, where were you? Why didn't you stop this? Why, you could have easily stopped this from happening, especially when you think about stuff that's happening to children and assaults and so forth. And like, do you ever struggle with why God um, allows that to happen? Doesn't intervene more?
I don't so much with the rape. Um, people are going to do crazy things. I guess for me personally, I struggle with, why did, how did I get into that relationship? And, it feels like such a waste. 35 years is a long freaking time. And but again, my ex had his path and I had my path. So yeah, I guess I haven't really gotten angry at God for that kind of thing. I get angry about people who profess to be, godly and then make really bad choices. That pisses me off.
Yeah. I guess I think, and obviously I don't believe that God we're talking about exists, but when I did like take the Catholic Church with all their scandals that have been happening for
Yeah.
seems like forever, it's like really you think about some of these kids and you just think their lives. It isn't just that there was a bad memory. It was like there was a bad memory or memories, but then it dominates their whole life, and some of them
Yeah.
may be suicidal or something. And you
Yeah.
think this isn't just like, God, why didn't you intervene in this person's, this one day or one event? Like, why didn't you intervene in their life and keep them from becoming suicidal and feeling like their life was empty? And I, I obviously don't deal with those questions now, but I definitely did before. And I think I chalked them up to the typical traditional answer. Well, we don't know. God has a reason he let it happen. He obviously didn't want it to in one sense, but he permitted it. And in heaven, he will for sure make everything right. Like whatever we think of the justice of it, he will restore the years the locusts have eaten. He will make right all the wrongs. And
Mm-hmm.
when he's done doing justice, we will simply say, God, you are the judge of the earth. You have done right. And on that day, we will be less concerned about this, obviously. But it was definitely an angst for me of God,
Mm.
this, especially, as a dad of kids. And with you being the same, that the kids are your life. You want to protect them in every way from every little harm you can. And to think about what happens to kids, it truly is, it sets me on fire sometimes. And anyway,
I'm wondering if that came from your Calvinist background, because mine wasn't Calvinist. And so mine was more free will and that we chose our path. So if you're thinking that God chose your path, then that would make a complete sense why you would have that anger towards God. So for me, it was, each person chose their evil path. And so I'm mad at the person more
yeah,
so than God. So that's interesting. Our doctrinal
yeah.
foundation, paved our thinking process individually.
Well, I guess maybe not as much per se that God definitely caused it, but that he could have stopped it and didn't.
Mm.
Like if God could have stepped in and didn't, it's kind of like if you were to, physically like observe some kind of a horrific crime happening and you had every ability to step in and stop it, would
Mm-hmm.
you? And if you said, no, I'm just going to sit back and watch, you're kind of culpable for not stopping it. And it definitely felt like this doesn't make sense that God doesn't stop some more crimes. But anyway, I know that's a bigger topic than we can tackle in a few minutes. My last question was going to be about divorce. How do you feel like the church does these days with letting people know that divorce is acceptable? Like I know that when I was growing up, it seemed like it was very much a stigma. And even though you can even read in the Bible that God gave Israel a certificate of divorce, that you don't divorce. It's considered kind of evil. It's considered a very much a second best at best. Like God really wants you to find a way to forgive and to, he loves for things that are broken to be healed, not for things that are broken to go apart. He wants to heal your marriage. He wants to heal your church, whatever. And I know that, for example, even people in my extended family, my personal extended family, that I think could have said the same thing your kids did to you to say, it's time to move on. They wouldn't, because the church basically said, if you do this, even if it's the other person's fault for, ruining the marriage, you are making it much like you're taking something bad and you're making it permanent. and you're not leaving room for God to fix it. What if
Mhm.
instead of, you see this thing of, God, it's been a tough 10 years, I'm moving on. And God says, yeah, but at year 15, I've got a miracle waiting for you. Just wait and see what I'm going to do. It seems and I'm not in the church obviously now, but when I was in it, it seemed like the church was getting better at saying, no, there is a time to say, give people some space and give people room to grow. But also if you're being abused, and there's no repentance, whatever words they would use for it, if there's no signs that it's moving in the right direction, it's okay to move on. That this is acceptable. Would you agree that that's a message that's getting better in the church, or how did you hear it?
Well, when I went to my pastor, I was told by the elders I did not have grounds for divorce for emotional and spiritual abuse. So that kept me in my marriage for many more years. And since then, that pastor last summer apologized to all 7 of my kids, came to my house and apologized. He now does not agree with that, but that's actually, he went to Bob Jones. So, those old teachings are still very, very prevalent. And many, many pastors will put the institution of marriage as a priority over the individuals in the marriage. So that's what was happening to me, even though I was dying. I mean, like I said, I was on antidepressants, anti-anxiety, and I had a host of chronic medical issues going on as a result of going through emotional abuse and spiritual abuse. It didn't get better. And interestingly enough, my physical issues dissolved or resolved as soon as I moved out. That should tell you something. But yeah,
That's awesome.
the pastors, many are still not on board with that and only believe that you can get divorced with, abandonment or infidelity. They don't understand that the whole certificate of divorce, the thing in the Old Testament, the Jewish practices. I'm still fighting with it an awful lot on Twitter. So women or or men who are in harm's way in their marriages are still being told you have to suck it up and stay married. So that's one of my big issues that I deal with on Twitter, and I consistently posting to pastors, challenging them to change. Take a good look at this. Are you really doing the best you can do to your people when you tell them they can't divorce, when they've been in, harm's way for years and years and years? So
do you think some of that is the idea of like, you're suffering for the Lord? Like if you suffer, you're literally sending rewards up to heaven. Like whatever suffering, whether it's, for professing your faith and someone's rude to you, or your spouse is rude to you, like you're suffering, but God sees it and he's going to reward you. Do you think that's part of the motivation at all?
Oh yeah. And I had it said to me. Yeah, it's ridiculous. But I completely am against it. But it took me a long time to get to that point because I believe those things as well. So I had to learn, more about divorce and what was going on. Jesus answered a specific question in the New Testament, but he didn't elaborate, but they took that one answer and applied it for all without looking into the Jewish history of divorce. So yeah, that's a really bad situation. And I know I've been a part of many groups online of women who've been in emotional and spiritually abusive homes. And there was an article in Christian Post by Brandon Showalter. I encouraged him to write this article. I said, Brandon, there are thousands, tens of thousands of women in these groups who are now understanding that they are living in abusive marriages. And the tide is turning, and these women are gaining knowledge, and they are standing up, and a lot of them are leaving their abusive spouses because of these groups. I have a group of over 100 that just kind of runs itself. I don't have to do any moderating or anything, but these are women who've been in harmful marriages. There's other groups that have thousands of women in it. So I think the tide is going to be turning. we're going to be seeing more and more women say enough is enough. So, that's great. But it's a lot of work ahead of these women. I mean, I know what it was for me to go back to school and start over. It's hard work.
So, well, I feel like I've got a lot of other questions for you, so we'll have to do a follow-up at some point, but you're making some awesome points, and I really do hope that people are taking some of this to heart, that there is a better path than just sucking it up and letting people abuse you. That's not the way life has to be, and that asking the right questions and saying when something sounds wrong is an acceptable choice. And I'm so glad that you were able to get away from some of the really toxic stuff that you faced. Can I ask, as a short final question, how do you feel like you're doing now? You feel like you're at a good spot?
I don't feel like I'm at a good spot yet. I'm like I said, I'm in therapy. I don't feel totally grounded yet. It's taken a long time, but I have to realize that I was in that environment for so many years. Well, I've been in toxicity my whole life. So, it's just, unwrapping all of this stuff, taking a good look at it, and now I'm putting myself back together. So
does it feel like it's
good.
moving in the right direction at this
I'm
point,
definitely moving the right direction. I'm doing EMDR, which is really helpful.
What does that stand for?
Eye movement desensit. I don't know.
I'll look it up.
Look it up. EMDR. It's a really cool therapy. It lessens the time where you have to do talk therapy, but your brain is doing all kinds of healing work as your eyes are moving back and forth. And I've seen a lot of progress in that. So I'm going to keep doing that. And just keep on moving forward, and being true to myself, being true to people all around me, and being healthy, Yeah.
You reminded me in a funny sense that when I had severe insomnia for about 30 years, and I moved from Philadelphia to Georgia for a very special doctor. And one of the things he did was he was doing a lot of work with my eyes and literally spinning me blindfolded in chairs. And it was crazy that some of the stuff he did worked very, very quickly to cure 30 years of insomnia. But
oh wow,
it is amazing what some doctors that really know the brain really well, what they can do.
Neuroscience is great, and I highly recommend getting with therapists who know that. I would not recommend Christian therapists, but just go to people who are really trained, trauma informed, and really love their field. There's a lot of work that our brains just naturally want to do. Our brains naturally want to heal itself. So it's really cool. There's hope. There's hope to get out of the trauma that we experienced.
Yeah. And I think too, just to maybe a final note from me, that there's a lot of people that really do want to support people going through these painful things, whatever your reason for, your pain is, and wherever you're going to land with it, whether you're going to stay in a church or leave. Like there are people that care. There are people that really, really care about how you're doing. So I highly encourage people, find a community if you can, that's safe and good, and get plugged in. I know for me, that was a major, major game changer for me, to find groups that I could talk to about these things, because you feel at first like you're learning, like, has anyone else seen this? Is anyone else asking these questions? And then you realize like a lot of people are asking these questions, and you get plugged in, and it really helps.
Yeah, being alone is very terrifying. And, we are creatures who need to have companionship and understanding. And so, I highly recommend any kind of group that, where you can be validated and respected and cared for.
Well said. Well, I appreciate your time. I know I've kept you long here, but everyone, we've been speaking with Julianne Smith, and I will have some links beneath our video for her page, for her Twitter feed, for her blog. And please go like and subscribe and all that. Check out what she's got. And again, Julianne, I really appreciate your openness. You've been so honest with your answers and sharing some very painful things. And I appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable with us. So thank you so much. Thank you for what you're doing to help people to escape toxicity in the church and in other venues. And I appreciate your being willing to shine some light on some very dark topics as well in the news and so forth. But thank you so much. It's been great to get to know you. And I definitely look forward to doing it again sometime.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.